So there's been a lot of confusion on this shunning topic, and some people think it means you're shunned forever. You know, some people think I got kicked out of my home, kicked out of my community. I only got shunned for 2 weeks. 2 weeks was the minimum sentence, and that's because you can only get shunned or unshunned at church, and we only have church every 2 weeks. At the end of church, before we sing the final hymn, the bishop always makes an announcement. He will say, for example, the next church services are to be held at Abe Yoder's in 2 weeks, Lord willing. And then sometimes he will say, and the brothers and sisters can remain seated after the hymn is over. And so we'll sing the hymn, and then everybody files out except the baptized members. So if you're not baptized, you really don't know what goes on behind those closed doors, and you've never actually experienced real shunning. A lot of communities and families still shun their kids for leaving, even if they're not baptized, but it's not technically shunning. It's not illegal shunning. It's just the family's interpretation. If you're baptized, you're not supposed to tell your younger buddies or brothers or anybody anything that goes on, because they're considered, if they're not mature enough to be members, they're not mature enough to know what goes on. You might hear rumors before you get baptized about what it's like, but you will never know until you're there. So the day that my shunning kicked in was 2 weeks after the day of my drinking incident. And all day at church, it drug on forever. You know, I had this just weighing on me. And the final hymn was sang, everybody filed out, and Owen Dotweiler says, you know, where there's a vineyard, there's always work to be done, pruning, weeds to be pulled, and the same is the case in our church. You know, a young man came to us and told us that he went and bought some beer, and he gave it to, you know, his buddies, and so, you know, we bring this before you, and we ask that this young man give us the room. And then he said my name. I went outside. I waited for about 10 minutes while they did a vote, and everybody was okay with shunning me, which wasn't a surprise. And Alvin Raber comes out and said, okay, you know, you can go home. You are now officially shunned, and you are not able to eat lunch with us. So I went home, and before lunch, I just booked it out of there. So I went home, and I was hungry. So I wasn't supposed to touch the food without it being handed to me, but I didn't know what else to do. So I went and got a loaf of bread and a jug of milk, and I made me some chocolate milk and a sandwich, and I just never told anybody. And it didn't seem to hurt him. I'm going to have to do a part 2 on this one as well. Welcome to What Shunning Felt Like, part 2. So after I went home, I made me some food, you know, cleaned up all the mess so that nobody would know, and just kind of hung out. I wasn't allowed to go to the singing that evening. Obviously, I was grounded as well, or, you know, shunning, part of that is you can't go to a singing. So I wasn't allowed to see my girlfriend, and that was probably the hardest part for me. Me and my buddy Lester both had girlfriends up in Ashland, and we would only see them like every other week or so because it was expensive to hire a driver to go see them. That was actually the reason we were drinking together that afternoon, because we normally hang out together in another community, and, you know, we weren't going to see our girlfriends that weekend, and we were bored, so that's why we were drinking. The next day, I went to work. I worked all that first week like normal. I sat off to myself a little bit to eat my lunch, you know, and kind of worked by myself a little bit, which I didn't mind, and until I had to hand Checky a level on Friday of that first week. And then the second week, I didn't get picked up, but that was okay. I didn't mind that either. And it was, I think, the middle of November, you know, and I wanted to go deer hunting, but my dad said that it wouldn't be good if I got a deer during that time. So I told him I'm going anyway. I'm just not shooting anything. So 2 weeks later, church was at my house. And it was kind of interesting because when you're shunned, you have to go to this little separate room and where the preachers are and take counseling from them on what you've done. And the funny thing is, it was actually my room. So I went up to talk to the preachers, and I sat on my bed while the preachers were sitting on a bench facing me. It was just the weirdest experience of all of this was that I could almost laugh out loud, you know, like it was my own room. It felt so weird to have all the preachers sitting in my room while I'm sitting on my bed and they're counseling me on drinking. So I wasn't told that my sentence was going to be 2 weeks. I was just told that I was shunned. So after services were over, I had to leave the room because I was considered a shunned member. I wasn't allowed to be there for, you know, the discussion. So they did a vote and everybody agreed to unshun me and that I was repentant enough. So I had to basically go back inside and do a confession, and then I was considered a member again. And the Saturday a week before I got unshunned, the preachers came to see me and they asked me if I had apologized to Leroy Baller for tearing his clothesline down. And I said no, and they said, well, you're going to have to. So I went and did that.